if you're not in a place where everything's being stripped away, imagine if it was. Imagine if you weren't playing bass on tour anymore or whatever, or you weren't doing that thing anymore. What then do you bring to the table? Means I got to go figure out who I am in God and who it is. And that's kind of some of the stuff I figured out. I was like, oh yeah, that stuff had nothing to do with music. Like the stuff I shared with like a person that people want to be around and like attracted to that energy. Like, oh, I can do that anywhere. I don't have to be playing music to be that person still, right? So, and that's something I'm constantly working on. So continue to work on yourself and figure out what is it that makes you tick? What is it how do you feel closest to God?
Welcome back to the AWI podcast. This is a time of just authentic conversations about Christian worship, theology, and the arts. And we are here today with Zach Rudulph. And I get the honor and privilege of talking with him about how instruments and being an instrumentalist is an avenue of worship. This is our 5th episode of Avenues of Worship through the Arts.
Oh,
and
what
so
an honor.
we get to talk about this
Very
today.
Cool.
Yeah. And so I just have a question of how would you even define worship in general?
Ooh. Man, okay. Well, I would probably define worship. First of all, it's an honor to be here. This is great. I'm very excited to be in this Avenues of Worship.
Yes.
Yeah, number 5. I feel good. 5 is good. I feel that. I'm one of 5 kids. I like that. I would define worship as more than just song, obviously, more than just song and dance. And I think it's something we say, but we don't always like really dig in and unpack it. But I think we've grown up now as our culture knows that it's not just singing and playing music. That's where it kind of maybe it used to be thought through like that. So what does that mean? That means like how do we bring, for me, worship means how do we bring just an awareness of God to every situation. So if you're doing that, then everything you do is acting out in worship. Totally. But it does take a thought. You can't just go blindly through your day and through your life. Then you're not really giving a life of worship, I feel. So it takes time. It takes thought. It takes like intention of like, oh yeah, let me do this. I'm doing this like for God's glory, or even this. Not even have to be that spiritual. Just how's your attitude in the process of whatever it is you're doing?
Yeah, heart posture.
Your heart posture. Oh, there we go. That's the right. That's the one I'm looking for. Heart posture. If your heart posture is right, then that is worship. I mean, then God is pleased. So I feel like if I can make my Creator pleased in every situation, then you're being worshipful, right? Because the definition of worship, right, to some degree, I don't know exactly, but it's probably giving honor and glory back to your Creator and thankfulness and gratitude and all those things. So if we're doing that in every area of our life, like why should we limit it to just being that time when we sing or the time when we're on Sunday? So
yeah, absolutely, fully agree. I think so much of worship is the awareness that everything that we're doing, we are able to connect with the Creator. And I remember one of my old professors, Dr. Martin, you also knew him, he would talk about how worship was often like closing the gap between us and God. And like truly connecting with him. That's and good. And so I think so much of it is the awareness of the heart and the heart posture of like, if I'm actually connecting with the Creator, I'm opening my heart to him and what he's saying, what he's doing, and what I can bring and offer him. And so much of like the Old Testament too talks about worship being a sacrifice. And I mean, Abraham almost sacrificing Isaac was the first time that worship was mentioned in the Bible. And so much of it is like, okay, like I am laying down like my sacrifice, my trust, like my heart, and the heart posture and the awareness. So
it's interesting that that's where worship was first mentioned. It's transformed into this being
music,
like music only, singing only type of thing.
Yeah, and definitely like there is, I think, something about singing too, because singing is our whole body, which is different than like other instruments or other things that we do, because it requires all of us of like, my voice is inside of my body and my body's telling my body to say these words out loud, and so it requires you to be thinking. It requires like all the connection, and so I do think
engaged.
Totally, exactly. And so I think there is something to singing that is interlocked of like singing praises is worship, but yet it's not only like there's so much more beyond.
I think singing is an easier form of worship, and the other forms of the day-to-day stuff I'm talking about just takes more awareness, and that stuff you gotta work on. Your own mindfulness of keeping Christ first in your day-to-day conversation and in your heart, like the posture and all that. Yeah. So it is a bit of a, not a cop out, but an easy way out of, to just be like, yeah, I'm checking my worship
Full
box.
body,
It's just seeing her go play and then just be like, I'm worshiping. I did it. Right.
Yeah. And so as an instrumentalist, you've been an MD, you've been a bassist, you've actually toured with Andy Grammer around the world, and that's awesome. You did that for 12 years, and you were musical director, bassist, and background vocalist. And you're also involved in your local church at Real Life Church of LA, and you're the creative director there, and you're also a dad of 4, so that's amazing. Yes, and you're a songwriter, music producer, and teacher. Yeah. So you have.
I mean, every music world, you have to try and wear all
do
the
everything
hats that you possibly can. Yeah. Then
correct.
You throw husband and father in there, which of course goes to the top of the list, but it'd be just full plate, full schedule.
Yeah, and so with all of your background and everything, you are dealing a lot with instruments, and so therefore, whether you're being a teacher, whether you're being a music director, whether you're a background vocalist, those are all different instruments. But like you play bass specifically, but I don't know. Do you play other instruments?
Yeah, slightly. I can get by, and I did the pedagogy for like all the instruments and stuff like that.
Yes. But, But so with all that knowledge, how are instruments used for worship?
Yeah, because singing wasn't my first thing, and like we talked about, singing's like the quick and easy, the fast way to worship, right? Or the more obvious one, I guess.
Fast food worship, maybe.
Fast food
just
worship,
kidding.
just
Not
sing
that,
a song.
But I just thought it was funny.
No, I think it's nice because I do feel worship more in a quiet space. Like, in some people worship, I feel like out loud and sing and that works for them. And then some people it's more internal. So for me, it's a lot more internal. Processing, thinking, being aware, all that kind of stuff. So one of the things that's worshipful to me is helping a corporate situation, and then being able to be a part of music helps that corporate celebration happen. Yeah. And so sometimes I don't even realize that I'm worshiping. I'm just being a part of it, right? Which then I look back and go like, oh yeah, that was a very worshipful moment. I didn't.
Yeah, you're so captivated.
Yeah, I was in it, right? Being in the zone during musical performance or whatever how you want to call it. But yeah, that's how I see it a lot of times. Yeah, like that.
Yeah, I love that. And specifically through bass, how do you think how is that?
So a lot of times when I'm doing like a bass symposium or having a conversation about bass, it's obviously that I'm biased because that's my favorite instrument. Yeah. But there's also some science behind the energy of the low end. And I didn't even realize that, and why that was so attractive to me as a little kid. My dad played bass, and my dad says, "Oh, you were little and used to fall asleep with your body banged up against the boom, boom against the bass, like as I was playing on the cabinet on the speaker." And I really resonated with literally and physically, or figuratively and literally resonating with the energy. And so that's why I really realized quick that low end energy like affects a space. Really, really. High end energy will do one thing, can affect the space, but low end energy really can affect your emotional state. And so, I mean, you can feel that in house music. As soon as the beat gets going, like the mood changes, like everything like that. So I really like having that control, I guess, or that power of the emotional state. Like there's times where you go to there's a chord, but then you can change the quality of that chord and the bass because everything's kind of left to right and on piano, right? So low end to high end. So in the bass world, you can change notes without destroying the chord, and the energy changes to the chord. The chord is the chord, but you can kind of change notes around it, and the energy changes. And people will show you that on a piano too, if it's
first inversion, second inversion.
Same idea. But you can't always feel that energy. You can kind of sense it in more harmonic instruments, but you can feel the energy change. Like you can feel that minor thing become major even more than you can on a piano. I think you can really feel that. I can. Yeah. So I was aware of how that changes the mood and the energy of the space and in the room and people's hearts and attitudes. So yeah, does that answer it? I think I answered it.
Yeah. And so then like on a Sunday when you are playing bass, you can totally change the room. So like even I guess when you're playing, like, are there specific things you even like do to
Yes.
to then make it like?
Yeah, so if I'm specifically speaking, playing alone, there's a couple of things that I do know that I started doing naturally. That now that I teach it a little bit more, I'm realizing like, oh yeah, that's how I do that, and that's why I do it. I do it all the time, but I didn't think,
Or you're like, why?
do I do it? Yeah. So, for instance, going to the high end of your instrument can be playing too much, but it also can be very great in a time of a breakdown section. I naturally jump the octave immediately without even thinking about it. It just feels the right thing to do on a breakdown section, let's say. So yeah, just taking it. So I'm not playing more necessarily. A lot of times if people go up their octave on their instruments, they start playing busier or more soloistic or anything. Not trying to do anything like that, but just changing the energy to where it gets lighter immediately.
Yeah.
That's one thing I do. Often inverting chords, like I mentioned, driving the beat. So because you're connected so much with the drums.
Notes.
Yeah, digging in, really driving it, being ahead of the beat too, like driving ahead of it can really push energy. Noticing it. So stuff I didn't realize that's what I was doing, but drummers will tend to do that too. Naturally, it just comes out of them that if they're paying attention, those are the things that they're doing to change the energy of the song. So 8th notes, 16th notes, whatever that might be. Really trying to set up choruses, and that could be a slide into the chorus. It's those things that we hear all the time that we like, that when it's missing, you're like, what's that thing?
Oh, you can tell even when the bass isn't even there, period.
Yeah. That reminds me, like, landing on one is very important, right?
Totally.
No matter what you do, when you get to that downbeat, are you on the right note for that downbeat is very important.
Yeah.
And oftentimes an afterthought, like I'm gonna play this thing and I'm gonna I'll get back to home, but they're doing their thing, and I'm guilty of this myself, and then going like, oh wait, what is the home note? Not thinking about it to the last minute.
Yeah. Since bass is also a rhythmic instrument a little bit more than like piano or guitar, how do you approach that in worship? Because it's a different mindset.
Yeah. I probably wish I was a drummer. My brother became the drummer, and that's fine because I do feel like, I got the best of both worlds. I got the little harmonic thing happening
together too.
So I really love changing the rhythm of bass and even the bass line. I find myself doing this. I drive the band sometimes just by changing the rhythm. For instance, there's this fun gig I do in LA at this restaurant. It's really fluid. But as far as it's just 4 pieces, it's really small and fluid, and we kind of all just play off each other. And I noticed that if nothing's happening, I'm like, I'm getting bored a little bit myself too. Like let's make this salsa, right? And that if I do it and I go, just push those chords a little bit, then the drummer follows and like, cool, that's fun. And then we're like, let's samba it up, and then like, so I'll do that, and then that'll immediately he'll follow. So that's a lot of fun. I love changing the rhythm a lot. And then I'll play a rhythm or do a triplet line, and because the drummer did it, and then we'll try to do it together next time. You're like, we'll look at you like, oh, that was cool. And then when it comes back around, when the 8 bars or whatever comes back around, let's do something together like that. So I am constantly messing with rhythm. In fact, that's probably that's one of my things that keeps me from getting bored on bass. More than playing flashy or
like
runs and stuff like that. Yeah. Like some people are really good at that, and that's not really in my bag of tricks. I'm really good, I guess, with rhythm, and because I grew up with a drummer next to me since I was a kid, I love just like pushing the rhythm and let's try this and dropping rhythms, and then I love that as I'm playing. So maybe that's my thing that I like.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But that being said, you have to have a squad who can handle that and it's like ready to go with you.
Totally.
Right? And then placement, and also is that the right thing to be doing right now? Right? It works in that situation when I was talking about, because it's like a low key jazz type of gig where you can play around, but you can't just go messing up the song for no reason because you're bored too. So you do have to serve the music.
Yeah, and even based off of that, in a worship context, there's this constant, I feel like when you're truly a musician and like love the art of music, and specifically in your instrument, like you learn to like be super creative and to like, okay, do runs, do all these like rhythm changes, and like even vocally like learn how to do runs and ad-libs and all that stuff. But with worship, there's this tricky balance of when is it distracting and when does it
doing too much.
Yes, and when does it like add to and enhance the worship experience. And so how do you know when to lean on what?
That comes from mistakes and people looking at you like, what in the world? You know what I mean? That another really good example. I was really young. I was 18, playing at a big church in Covina area, not far from where I went to college, and APU, by the way, is where I went to college. And so this church was it was a mega church for sure. It had great players, had amazing players, and so they're doing a Saturday service, so with more youth oriented and stuff. So they had me on there, and this was great because I was just a freshman. And I was like, this is cool that I get to be on. I thought freshmen think they're hot stuff, especially instrumentalists, right? So I'm playing and doing my thing, and the drummer, so-and-so, was like, Ricky Lawson is the drummer? I'm like, don't know who that is. He was older than us anyways. So we're playing some funk, upbeat worship song thing, and I did something like in the higher register. This is what I'm talking about, no-nos in the higher register. And he called me out, and I'm glad he did. And because I learned, and I'm still talking about it like 20 years later, about how he was like, hey man, that's really, and he did it in a very good way, like, that's pretty well, but you should just keep it down, keep it down a little bit. And I forget how he said it. And initially I was like, okay. And then I found out who this guy was. Ricky Lawson turned out to be, he passed away, unfortunately, but he was he played with Michael Jackson, like an amazing. Like during that time when I was with him, he was playing with those types of artists.
You're like, no idea.
And I'm like, no clue. Like, what's this guy telling me? Blah, blah, blah. And so those things stick with me. So yeah, being open to that criticism is good and hard and difficult. But also just reading the room, right? Getting the sense of like, that's one thing I have a hard time with musicians who are just overplaying and they just are in their own head. Just constantly like, read the room. Is this working in this space, right? How is it reacting? How's the rest of your band reacting? Are they looking at you crazy? How's the audience taking that? Are they looking at you crazy? Did it fit? All that kind of stuff. So the sense of awareness is important. You can't just be playing in your own box.
Totally.
And a lot of the younger you are, usually the harder it is for you to look up and get out of your world. And
yeah, and even like from my experience as being like a worship leader, and when I feel led to go somewhere else and I'm like, none of the instrumentalists are looking up, like then you can't communicate. Or it's like if I put signs behind my back. Like,
no, it's good that you say that, because I think this generation has learned differently too, and maybe come from you figured out on YouTube, or you're looking at an iPad, and blah, blah, blah. And the way I grew up in worship, and which I kind of desire it to be if possible, is a sense of everybody has to look up and pay attention, otherwise it will fall. This because I came from the time before in-ears. Yeah. Right, where you had to like, where are we going next? I don't know.
So you have to be aware.
Yeah, you're scanning the room, you're looking at the guitar player, he's looking at the keyboard player, and they don't know, so they're looking at the drummer, and just, so that forces a really cool sense of camaraderie and a sense of like, we are in this together. Yeah. I actually I do miss that. As I'm saying it, I miss that because it forces a band to be tight quick. As opposed to like, because I've catch myself, when you have in-ears, you can just hear everything you want. You're like, oh, sounds great. I can hear the guitar player. I don't even need to look at him. Like, I get it.
Yeah, because you hear it all.
You don't have to interact like that. So I do miss that a little bit. Yeah. Where you had to really be paying attention and really be involved. And I think that shows in players today sometimes where we're just so used to doing it with playing with us in the YouTube, or playing with, just to ourselves, for ourselves. It makes a big difference. And then the whole point of worship is to have, well, at least in this context, is to have the congregation be a part of this with you, right? Yep. And so the sooner that they see like, oh, these guys are enjoying each other, they're looking up, they're aware, they're worshiping. Whether they are or aren't, it sure appears that there's more interaction going on amongst each other, and they're more involved in other than just staring into their iPads. So, yeah, that's something that's kind of hard to break. It's a culture thing too. I kind of miss that.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite things, she's actually one of your students, Summer. She plays bass. Yeah. And I love when she's playing bass and she's like singing the song. Yeah. And you see she's like screaming it and like it.
I want to see that. I never see that.
watch the
She's
live.
quiet in the lesson.
That's funny. Yeah, and it's just like, it's so, like, it brings me to worship. Like, when I'm just watching her, I'm just like, wow, like, you know. And so then it's like I get into it even more, and I think that's something that's so beautiful. Like, when you either have created that culture, or when someone's like talented enough to where it's like, okay, they know the chords, like they know, they practiced. And so also, like, practice also allows you to be able to, like, I know this, and so let me worship now.
Right.
And then it's like, that's where you're able to, like, look up, that's where you're able to sing.
Know, the pop tours that I was doing actually kind of helped that, because you play the same stuff every day, and you play it the same way for the most part every day. Some tours, they'll let you be more flexible. For the most part, like, they want you to play it the same way every day, and just the consistency. So what else do you have left? Right? If you're literally playing the same thing, the same 4-chord song, the same way every time. So I kind of learned real quick that one way for me not to get bored was to look up, right? Because I can't just keep overplaying the song every time.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah. So it freed me up. That's one of the good things about a tour, is like you really internalize those songs. You can play them completely muscle memory. And so, all right, what are you going to do? You're going to just play it with muscle memory and just look ridiculous, like just ridiculously bored. You're just going to be so bored out of your mind, and it'll show. Or you go like, how do I make this fun for myself, but as the result of it being fun for yourself is the audience and the congregation will respond to that too. So I caught myself doing that. Well, actually, I didn't catch myself. The audience caught me doing that, and they would come up to me after shows and be like, "Oh, you look like you're having so much fun. Oh, I just love watching you, and like I feel involved, and blah 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 blah, because you're looking at us and you're having a good time." And I was, because that's what I did to not be bored. Honestly, for myself, I was like, I want to find somebody and make a face at them, or whatever, or like say hi to somebody.
You have like pictures where you're like,
yeah, I definitely do. You've probably seen them. I definitely do. And some of that, like I said, was just out of pure didn't want to be bored. But it applies to church too, because now I go, oh, I see. I learned that actually a lot in that tour world, and man, it made the show better, because everybody was like, we want an audience. You're interacting, and you want an audience to respond back to you, right? So you have to, when you're doing a pop show, you have to really work at that. You have to really pull. So I don't know why in church, and maybe it's because it's worship to God, we don't do a great job. And there's a thin line too, if you're trying to be too showy, and everybody look at me, which is allowed in a pop performance, a secular performance. It's allowed, it's expected. So we need to bring a little bit of that into our players, I believe, but it has to be, I know you got to have the right heart posture. Yes. So where you're interacting enough, but you're not being too showy. It's like it's a thin line. Totally. It's almost easier just to be in a pop gig. Yeah. It's either just to default to just be bored and be that bass player who's that guy in the background, just the typical thing, or be over the top. It's almost easier to do one or the other, right? Yeah. And the church, you have to figure out how to do something kind of in the middle. Yeah. To be like, okay, interesting enough to where it's like you're enhancing it, but then also not like, not distracting, because I think that's something too of like, when you're in the worship realm, there's always that balance of like, okay, how do I enhance this, but also I don't want to be too distracting. Where it's like I draw someone out of worship because they're like, oh, that's so cool, but it's like, okay, but now you're looking at me instead of like the Lord. And it's like there's that like fine balance, but there is also the element of like the Lord give you that gift, and so it's like that's also a part of it. So it's such a fun line. It is interesting. It's very much a dance. So a lot of it comes down to where the heart of the team is, the heart and the person and each person is, right? Because even in that like showy moment, if they're doing it and it's creating like a joy amongst the players, because somebody did something really cool, everybody looks over there and they're all smiling. That's also cool, because then the audience congregation sees you smiling on stage when before you weren't smiling, and smiling's better than not smiling, right? Correct. So there is a thin line between it being over the top and being the right amount. And it's a dance. Yeah, because instrumentalists can also have like a stank face where you're just like, they do not look happy. Yeah. But then there's the stank face that's good, that they notice that they're like, ooh, that guy's into it. He's got the stank, like, so there's a thin line on that too. Totally. To kind of switch gears in a sense of, I
how do you, as an instrumentalist, not make your instrument your identity?
Ooh.
And how do you, especially like if we're in the worship realm, like, okay, we like believe in the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And so then how do you separate your instrument enough to where you're like, my identity comes from God, not this thing that I do?
Yeah.
How do you?
Yeah. Man. Yeah, that's actually something that I've recently kind of been working through, because the pop gig that I was doing for some time, post COVID and everything, I basically it fell apart, and then I got asked pretty much not to come back, and that hurt because I was like, oh, that's who I am. Like, I'm that dude, right? That's my thing. And so then we had another couple more years of nothing really happening, and I just had to wrestle with myself of just like, this feels very, very weird. So it was a bit of a dark time for me in that regard, and I'm still figuring it out, because it made me, I appreciate it now because it made me have to stop and go like, okay, put the bass down, put the performer guy down. Because like I said, that was easier for me to do. Performing that part came simple. Some people don't want to be up in front of people doing that, and that part I had so much training that it was easy. It was easy. So to stop and go, okay, who am I when I don't have the bass in my hand? Who am I when I'm not hopping on a plane, where I'm not like the guy going back and forth to LAX? Like, that was part of my thing. And I realized, like, oh, I had a sense of pride in that, which is okay to some degree. So there was a whole moment where I was going through that. It was like, I was so proud of the thing I had. But then you're like, well, you should be proud of what you're doing. But I was wrestling with all kinds of stuff mentally in my head at the time. And how it's I'm still working through it.
Totally.
Still working through it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, restate the question for me, because I got distracted thinking about something else. And I was like, come back.
You're good. Yeah. Well, how do you identify yourself with God and who He says you are, rather than who the world says you are? I know why I got
distracted, because I went back to a time where I was like at the lowest of my low, and I was that distracted me. But during that low time is when I had to go, okay, who am I? And I really just started digging into reading and podcasting. I got crazy about podcasts all the more at that time, and had to really speak a lot of life into myself, and simple stuff, like really simple, the basics of who I am and who God called me to be. It made me think more about my family, and now my husband, which I'd always been during the touring thing too, but like, this is priority number one, and my kids is priority number one. And so I really had to just peel everything off, and it takes work. And so now it was good, because it made me go like, oh, I put that life on a pedestal. Like, I didn't realize that's who I thought I was, but I'm looking back, I'm like, oh, that was,
you do it enough.
Judging by how crashed I am at the moment, that obviously was more than I put myself higher than I thought I needed to be. And so I constantly now, even today, have to balance that. Like, but it's been good, because I started really digging into breath work and just more alone time, which was crazy, because I normally was constantly performing, and now I'm like, how do you just deal with Zach when he's by himself, right? So now I enjoy it, but being alone, just meditation, exercise. I always loved to exercise, but it was just more mindful now. When I was like, before it was like, I'm exercising because I need to stay on shape on tour kind of thing. And now it's like, why are you exercising now? Right. For who are you exercising for, right? And I'm like, I shouldn't be exercising for anybody. I should be exercising for myself. Right?
Yeah.
All those conversations are constantly something that I'm working on. Because being a performer since I was so young, and then having it kind of stripped away, was kind of shattering. But also the best thing that could happen to me.
Totally. Yeah. And even when you think of like specifically exercising, it's like, okay, yes, like exercise for myself, but also in order for me to do the things that the Lord has called me to do, I have to have a healthy body.
Yeah.
And like, if I'm not healthy, like I could, something could happen, and the Lord, like, you could be taken out because you weren't healthy, but you have like unfinished assignments from God to do in your life, And and it's so, I think I find too, of listening to so many people's stories, and I'm like the youngest in my family, so I've like done a lot of like watching and learning. There's like different seasons where different things are either like we feel as like our identity, but even just different assignments that the Lord has like placed us in. Like I remember when you would talk about, like you visited one of our classes and you talked about your experience with touring and how it's like you were the guy that it was a fun hang, and how so much of that was who you were in like that space and like why people like wanted you to be there. And it's like I think so much of it was because like the Lord, like you had those like values and like you were a good person, so like people like are drawn to that, and so it's like, okay, that was like kind of your assignment for that season, along with like playing and all that stuff too. Good. And it's like, okay, now it's like you're more of a like dad and you're more of like a husband, and that's taken the like rightful like place of being more a bigger priority, and navigating like church life and like even having all this experience of like, okay, how do I have all this experience and like almost enhance like the church musical creative aspect too. And there's people are given different assignments for different seasons, and I think it's preach, sister, preach. And it's like it's so beautiful, and I've seen that in my own life as well, and I just think it's a sweet thing. And,
well, it's been fun because I've been able to now give back a lot more too, which I didn't even know I had anything to give. And I guess I do, and I get asked to do things and speak and to share my gift and like talk about those things in those classes, like you said, and then it's really rewarding, and that's cool because I'm getting rewarded. Before I used to get rewarded by being on the stage and doing that thing, and that was very rewarding. So that part of this journey is finding out what is rewarding. That's a healthy reward. In this new, what would you call it, new phase of life, new stage of
season phase, whatever.
What is rewarding? And so I appreciate little things a lot more, like my simple little once in a while pop gigs that I do. Like I really appreciate them. I really appreciate the people that I do it with more than I used to. And I don't know. I'm excited. I'm excited from where I'm at because now I get to do the creative arts directing thing at the church. I'm trying to pull all this experience that I had and figure out how do I play it out in them, and like the experiences of interacting with people on stage, like how do we bring that in the right amount into the church setting and stuff like that. So it's rewarding in a different way, but rewarding.
Yeah. Well, and you have this knowledge from so much of your experience that often the church doesn't necessarily have, because it's like you were grown up in the church, raised in the church, and it's like that's all you've done your whole life. Like that's a lot of people's stories, not everyone's, but I think it's beautiful when you have this knowledge, whatever it's in, of like I have this knowledge and therefore like I can bring it into this space and it affects. And it's like even I think too of, okay, I was a music major in college, and when I talk to people about music, I find myself being like, oh, I actually like know more than I thought because I literally studied it. And it's like, oh, this makes like, let me like help you with this. Like, this is why that makes sense because this is a thing, and it's like your experience impacts the spaces that you're in today. And so I think that's really beautiful. So as we come to a close, just thinking of someone who is listening, who is an instrumentalist today, and who specifically maybe in the church or is just using that for worship, what would you say to them today?
I would say, I would probably recap some of the things I said earlier, which would be to get out of your own box, so that to really think about how is this benefiting the team, right? How can we enhance, I say this to my kids, but are you helping or are you hurting? Right? Are you helping this thing sound better, be more creative, whatever, or is it just kind of hurting the vibe, hurting the thing? And so that goes with your attitude. That goes not only with music, like are you helping the song, but also are you helping the environment? And I think we forget often. I wasn't as aware of it as I was younger, but like the aura of energy we put off absolutely affects rooms. Absolutely, right? And I didn't know it, but people would say that I have this good charismatic energy, and people were like, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like I'm just being me, right? Which is cool. But I'm like, oh no, it came more natural for me, but maybe because I just practiced that, or maybe I got it from my dad. I don't know. But it's something that people need to stop and think about. Is like, what is it that I'm putting off? Like, what vibe am I putting off? And so if you check yourself, you go, oh, I want to, and even if you're like, I want to be the person who brings that to the table, joy or energy or comfort. Am I putting that off? So I would encourage you to do the homework. To if you're not in a place where everything's being stripped away, imagine if it was. Imagine if you weren't playing bass on tour anymore or whatever, or you weren't doing that thing anymore. What then do you bring to the table? Means I gotta go figure out who I am in God and who it is. And that's kind of some of the stuff I figured out. I was like, oh yeah, that stuff had nothing to do with music. Like the stuff I shared with like be a person that people want to be around and like attracted to that energy. Like, oh, I can do that anywhere. I don't have to be playing music to be that person still, right? So, and that's something I'm constantly working on. So continue to work on yourself and figure out what is it that makes you tick? What is it how do you feel closest to God? Is it when you go on a hike? I love going on a hike and just being alone now more than ever before. Is it getting in a cold plunge and you're like, you get connected? I like cold plunges too. I got one now in my house. So
that's the best.
Anytime, come by.
It's the best.
So whatever it is that gets you like grounded and centered and off of your high horse that we put ourselves on, we do it without even thinking. Like I had put myself on one during that season of my life and didn't even kind of notice it or realize it, right? And I wasn't a terrible person by any means, but just didn't realize that I had been putting some things, like layers of things of myself in front of me before people could actually really see me. So trying to just pull those layers away, so when you come into a situation, and I think about it now too, before I step into a situation, especially with new people, I just say a little mental prayer to myself, like, okay, Zach, make sure you're not bringing you think you're cool attitude into this. Make sure you're being open and you're listening and you're down to hear. But stuff that I hadn't thought about before, like especially in new spaces. That happened to me just recently. Went to rehearsal, all new people. I was asked to be in part of this really cool music video. Didn't know the artist, and I remember parking, and I was like, okay, I got time. Let me take 30 seconds and just make sure that I'm in the right spot. Like also getting like, hey, if this goes nowhere, fine. Like what are you gonna do? How are you gonna be then if this is gonna be terrible? Like what if you go in there and everybody sucks? Right? How are you gonna because there's times where I've been around musicians where maybe everybody isn't as good as they think they are, and then they just have a crappy attitude. So like, nobody can play like on my level. You know what I mean? So just whatever that is, take the time and play out those situations in your mind, and like how am I gonna respond? You know? Yeah. And you really have to be centered and grounded and ready to do that by working on yourself. And all that has nothing to do with music technically, but it applies in all areas of our life. And as a musician, everybody's looking to you. You're a leader. That's another thing I would say is you're a leader no matter what position you're in. If you're the guitar player, the blah, 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 blah. If you have any type of role where people are looking at you, whether you like it or not, you're a leader, right? And so they're going to follow your life off the stage too. Yeah. Who are you going to be off the stage? And so, take the time to figure out who that is, who you are, and what do you bring to the table to be helpful and not hurtful.
Yeah, I think it's so important to find out who you are, who God says you are, and like not only like what he says, but like even like what's your specific like calling, assignment, like whatever you want to call it on this like earth and place, season, all the things. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom and your life experience, and just for being here. We just appreciate you,
Don. It's an honor. I love this place. It's so fun to be here always.
Awesome. See you guys. Hey, thank you so much for watching this week's episode on our podcast. Today was our 5th episode of Avenues of Worship Through the Arts, where we got to discuss with Zach how instruments and being an instrumentalist is worship unto the Lord. If you liked this episode, press that like button and subscribe to our channel for more. We'll see you next time. Thanks!